Last week we were talking about public speaking, sort of our entry into public speaking. We didn't really expect to be doing what we're doing. And we sort of began to unpack that grand adventure that we went through, shared some of the stories, very sort of a unique message, I think, for you and I to even walk through. And it's funny how easily we forget. I feel like we've lived two lives. One is before Ellerslie, where we used to travel the world. And then once Ellerslie started, we didn't. And so our kids have grown up knowing us in sort of our Ellerslie version, which is sort of a localized thing where we have a church and we have students from all over the world that come in to us here. But to really understand what makes us tick and how we became who we are, you sort of need to know that first, what would it be, 15 years. You could sort of divide it right down the middle because we've been married 30. So that's pretty good. And the first 15 years, we could have even called this series the first 15 years, huh? But why don't you sort of begin to remember on that? Because this is almost like a part two of last week, where last week we sort of began to unpack what it was like to begin to speak in public, what the adventures were. And this one, I think it'd be good if we emphasized sort of the impact of being in the public eye. What has that done to us? Was this a good thing? Was this a hard thing? So why don't you speak to that?
Well, I think we talked last time about how we never intended to be public speakers. We had plans for our lives. We were heading to medical missions, and it was just something God really dropped into our lap. And at first I was really not excited about it for a couple of reasons. First, public speaking I didn't feel like it was my strong point at all. It wasn't something I was overly comfortable with. I was a musician, so I was okay being on stage if I was doing a song or something, but I had been in a few plays when I was younger, so acting maybe was okay. But the idea of actually delivering a message that I had to prepare was really intimidating for me. I don't think it was as intimidating for you because it was more of your natural gift, but it just didn't really fit into our plan for our life. And when we first started speaking, it was mostly to youth groups, young adults, youth rallies, youth conferences, because everybody wanted us to share our love story and all the principles for building a relationship differently, because that's what we had done. We had gone about our relationship differently, and so people wanted the younger generation to kind of catch a vision for that. So there were a lot of youth pastors that brought us in, or parents who organized a youth event for us to come and share. And I think that was a really interesting way to start, because that's a tough audience. It's a really tough audience, especially when they don't really want you there. Somebody else is the one who brought them there to hear you. And they're kind of like, I don't want you to tell me how to change my life. My life is fine. It's, I want to be dating around. I want to have this really physical relationship with my boyfriend, my girlfriend. I don't want you to challenge me on those points. And so we were coming into kind of a tough audience. And I think we had mentioned in one of the other episodes, a lot of youth pastors also had been kind of setting up these young people for an ADHD attention span, because they wouldn't do anything more than a 15-minute devotional. I remember they always called them devos. That was
the cool way of saying it. Yeah.
With teenagers, that was so cool. But they would not do more than 15 minutes. And then they would throw in a rock band or a light show or a movie or some pizza party, just something to keep it entertaining. So
under the premise that kids that age cannot focus for longer than, and you fill in the blank, because we heard all sorts of
And I think there was a
lengths.
lot of pressure on us to make our presentations very unique and exciting and funny and all these things. Now, I think you definitely had the gift of humor, which you did weave into those messages.
I had,
but
it's like a past tense thing. I had 6 kids.
I think you definitely had more of the gift of humor then than you do now. You can be funny now, but if you listen to your messages now versus
I
then,
totally agree. Yeah.
I would say back then it was probably 50% humor.
Well, it was because it was actually, I should even say it was our strategy. When we sat down to even strategize how we were communicating, It's like we leveraged what we had. Sort of like when God comes to Moses and says, "What's that in your hand?" And he says, "A rod." And the God says, "Throw it down." It's like, okay, Eric and Leslie, what is it that you have? We had music, so we used music, and Eric had humor. So, okay, throw that down. I'm going to use it.
Yeah.
And so we would soften, the way we said it, we'd soften our audience through making them laugh, and then we would stick the spear of truth in and hopefully change them.
Yeah. And so we did have some humor, but it definitely was not like really pre-scripted kind of like dramatic humor. It was just kind of your personality coming through. And even the way we presented our 4 keys to an amazing love story is what we called our talk back then. It was very straightforward. There were not a lot of bells and whistles to it. And I feel like we were not as seasoned of communicators then as we are now. So I think we could hold an audience attention, but I don't think that was necessary. They were used to like professionals. They were used to musicians and rock bands and comedians and all these big things. And
entertainment.
We came in with just like heartfelt truth. And yet they were riveted. And that was kind of shocking to everyone, including us, I think. And it really was this concept that they had never been challenged. They had never been spoken to as if they were able to rise up to a standard or able to respond to the Holy Spirit's conviction or able to catch a vision for, what God wanted to do with their life. They had always been treated as if they didn't have much of a brain, they didn't have much of a spiritual hunger, and they just needed to be entertained. And so when we came in and we actually just spoke from our heart and we shared our own story and we appealed to them, and I think it was a combination of that and just God opening their hearts. It was really supernatural to watch these young people go from like, I could care less what you're talking about and I can't wait to get out of here, to like riveted, not wanting to leave even after 3 hours. And I really don't think we can take that much credit for it. I think it was just we were hitting a nerve that had not been hit in their lives before. And we were speaking truth when they oftentimes had never actually heard straightforward truth from God's word. They had just heard a lot of Christian fluff. And it was just, for a lot of them, it was the first time they had been challenged, and it really arrested their attention. And so often at the end of those youth events that we did, they would be on their faces, they'd be weeping, it was a life-changing thing. And so I think from that standpoint, being a part of that, seeing God work that way was so rewarding and so fulfilling. There was definitely a flip side, though, where the more successful our events and our speaking became, the more in the public eye we were. And I found that really challenging. Personally, I'm a pretty private person. I don't think you're as much of a private person by nature.
I'm a blend. I don't really, I enjoy people, but I really enjoy not being around people too. So it's sort of a weird dynamic that I experience.
Yeah, but I do know about you, like if you have an embarrassing story happen to you, like you will broadcast that story. Like you
I enjoy
totally,
it.
You think it's hilarious and you like tell everybody. For me, I'm like, let's just keep that under wraps. I don't really want the whole world to know about that.
Yeah.
So I think
it's the difference between a private sort of mindset and a public mindset towards the way you live your life. Like I don't mind people knowing everything about me, whereas you would be like, I don't want people to know anything about me. And so I think that's been part of even parenting with those two lenses, is you and I learning how to protect what is sacred. And so we more defer to the way you approach things. I may be fine if someone knew that, and you'd be like, I would prefer that we not talk about that. And so I think that's been a good thing for us too. It's been part of our protection.
So we really, in the early days, we had to weigh, like, what do we share? What do we protect? Yeah. And I think the other part that was a little hard, especially in the beginning, was as like a public speaker, and I wouldn't say we were ever like Christian celebrities. We were to some people, but there were Christian celebrities that got way more attention than we did. Like, for example, when we would go speak at a huge Christian festival, we might be speaking to like 80,000 people or however many thousands were there, but we were kind of like the token speakers. The big names were the musicians, and everybody was there.
Because Switchfoot is about to come up on stage when we walk off, and so they're there listening, but that doesn't mean they came to hear
Yeah,
us.
I think some people did appreciate us. And we definitely had our people who like really admired us and looked up to us and wrote us fan mail and that kind of thing. But it really wasn't as, you kind of always got the feeling like you're down here somewhere. And there were we weren't aiming to be Christian celebrities. So in a way that was nice that we were kind of
let's
down here.
unpack even the time period in which we were traveling, because the Christian world has changed quite dramatically. Same problems, but just different package. And this is true at any season of time. It's just sort of a sad commentary, though, that Christianity has a tendency to idolize and make celebrities out of certain types of people, which shows the malleability of the modern Christian culture. Like, for instance, there are certain people that I would recommend if you came to me and said, okay, the Christian culture is trying to figure out who they should look up to. Eric and Leslie, what do you suggest? And I would have a list. But when we were first starting out, I'll give a quick list. Professional athletes, they're always esteemed in Christian circles. Actors that could carry a leading role on stage in TV or movies. Those are always very popular. Musicians whose music plays on the radio. There's a lot of worship leaders and various things, but unless your music is playing on the radio.
That was back in the day.
Yeah, this is back in the day. Now, again, this is going back quite a few years because music and fame and all that is completely rewritten now with social media. And then if you're wealthy, then we esteem you as the church too. There must be something virtuous about you. And then a key one that was key for us is if you were a published author.
Now, or if you were a best-selling author.
If you were a best-selling author.
Did become best-selling authors to our surprise. And
that was the zone of what we could call Christian celebrity. Now, I would agree with you that we were on the bottom rung of that. But it awakened two things. It awakened an increase of credibility, like where suddenly radio shows all around the country and around the world wanted us to be on their shows. We had people, if they just knew that we had published a book, because back then it was actually not that easy to publish a book because it had to go through the gatekeepers of the publishing industry. So if you had made it through that, the mindset in Christianity was that there must be something special about you. Very weird, because I remember thinking even back then, it's like, there is no difference between before we wrote this book and now that it's published, and yet we are treated different. And I remember noticing that. And what I want to just point out, because I think this will be important as we begin to unpack this, there's a danger in this mentality. So the way Christianity was, there's a danger. It's not any different now. It's just different heroes, different celebrities that now are weighted in the sort of the zeitgeist of the Christian world. But the ones that weren't in that list, public speakers, see, it's not that they looked down on public speakers. It's just that it didn't give you any credibility in the cultural sense. You were not a celebrity just because you got up on a stage and spoke. Now, if you're an author, or a musician, or an athlete, or an actor, and you got up on that stage, the reason they want to listen to you is because of those other things. Like for us, it was being a published author, which is very weird. But that was our credibility, and it carried us. It was a very unique thing to see. So public speakers aren't on that list. Listen to who else is not on that list. Pastors. Pastors, and I would say even to this day, are not celebrities in the Christian world unless they are one of those other things. Mm-hmm. If a pastor is a musician that is celebrated, if a pastor is an actor, which that's a rare one. If a pastor is wealthy, then maybe, right? And so it's
best-selling author.
If they're a best-selling author, then they have like a different dazzle to them. But just being a pastor actually was not a credibility point in the Christianity we grew up in. And I would say that's probably pretty accurate today.
Yeah, it's the New Testament talks about holding in esteem those who labor in the word and doctrine, like especially those who labor in the word and doctrine is what it says. And that really was not how people were being held in high honor. It wasn't those who labor in the word and doctrine, like pastors or missionaries. It was, and today I feel like it's even worse because you can make yourself a celebrity now with online, social media, YouTube, whatever. If you really want to gain a platform, it's not that hard to do it. If you have any kind of charisma or personality and act like you know what you're talking about and know how to wield social media, you can totally you're not necessarily being held in esteem because you labor in the word and doctrine. You're being held in esteem because you just got yourself out there. I remember getting a letter from a publisher wanting me to endorse this author that they were trying to get, noticed. And they gave me this whole spiel about why this author was worth promoting and endorsing and all these things. Never once did they mention this author's walk with God or study of scripture, understanding of the word, personal character, anything like that. It was like they have this many followers on Instagram. They have this many, likes on their Facebook. They have this much, YouTube following. It was just like everything was social media, and that was what was giving them credibility. And it kind of was similar back in our day, just not quite as...
It's just different things.
Yeah. Well, I mean, being a published author didn't actually mean that you had a lot of spiritual depth.
No,
there were a lot of authors that we met that should never have gotten a book published because they really did not have that spiritual depth or that connection with truth. And as we mentioned in a different episode, I think the publishing industry was all money driven. So whatever was popular in the world, it didn't matter if the author that they chose really was solid biblically. If they thought their book was going to sell, they would publish it. So we were thrust into this public spotlight. And on the one hand, I would say we were sometimes treated like total celebrities. Like that one time we walked into a TV studio for like a TV interview in LA.
And we've always looked young. I think that's important in this particular story.
We looked really young, especially back then.
Yeah.
And the lady, I think, thought we were there to like watch the show or something. And she kind of treated us like, who are you? Why are you here?
She
okay,
was
wait over
so
to the side.
Demeaning to us.
And then when she found out that we were actually supposed to be guests on the show, she
and
totally
she loved
changed.
our book nonetheless.
Yeah, she loved our book, figured out who we were, and she just completely changed and treated us like we were royalty celebrities. And there was a lot of that, and so that was.
And it was that, I don't know. I'm guessing you feel the same way. That was so disgusting.
Yeah.
To us, I'll just say.
Even just going into different ministry environments and being treated like, because the way the Christian culture was set up then, and because it probably still is now, we're not out there on the speaking circuit a ton. We do some speaking, but mostly our ministry is discipleship now. But it used to be, especially when we first started, like you walk in and other speakers or other musicians who went there obviously wanted special treatment. Mm-hmm. And so they were used to that. So they would give us a green room and all these snacks and at our beck and call and treat us that way. And even going to like the festivals that I mentioned before was all the musicians and the speakers that got the one air conditioned trailer. Everybody else is out in the hot sun. And you had like this disconnect from the audience. This like, you need to keep that separation as opposed to just being in there with the people. They're who you're there for. But there was this attitude. So I think we learned early on to kind of go against that and not to accept the special treatments. I remember one event host told us that they had a famous Christian band there prior to us. We were at some mega church or something. And they gave them such detailed instructions of how they should be treated down to the band gave the church these detailed instructions down to the brand of bottled water that they wanted them to have in the green room for them. Like, you have to have this brand. We won't accept any other brand.
I think they had a massage table.
Yeah, it was so ridiculous. And so we really, I think it was after like the first few months of speaking and being treated that way and kind of people acting like we should expect that and demand that we just said, this is so un-Christ-like. He was humble. He took the lowest place. And so we started going out as the crowd was arriving for these events and like meeting people and mingling with the crowd and welcoming them and talking to them. And we would find like you were really good at this, especially, but like the sound guys in the booth that were usually ignored and not appreciated, and make friends with them and just really start the ministry process before we came out on stage. And I think one of the reasons we were compelled to do that was because we had seen so much hypocrisy where a speaker, a pastor, a musician was one way in a green room and a totally different way out on stage. And we wanted to be totally genuine on and off stage. And I think that actually impacted a lot of people. In fact, I heard from people later, like that was more impacting to them than anything that we said on stage. So that was a really important lesson of just choosing the lowest place and choosing humility, even when the world around you is trying to get you to grasp that kind of higher place. And the other flip side of being in the public eye, which was so ironic, is that you are far more subject to criticism. So on the one hand, you're subject to being elevated way beyond what is healthy. And then on the other hand, you are subject to like absolute scrutiny and criticism at every single aspect of your life. And that was probably the hardest on me. You know, I was never susceptible to falling into pride, even though we did get a lot of encouragement. We did have a lot of people making a big deal out of us. We're best-selling authors and all these things. But the reason it was kind of a blessing in disguise. The reason I personally was never even tempted to think highly of myself is because we got so much criticism behind the scenes that there was like no way. And you always remember the criticism a lot more than you remember the praise. And so as a 20-something-year-old girl, very new into everything ministry, I was not prepared for that kind of criticism. There's a scripture that says, those who teach will be judged more strictly. And in the context, it's talking about judged, you know, in the heavenlies, judged on judgment day. But I actually think the same principle applies to the way people treat you. They will judge you more strictly. If you are in the public eye, they feel the freedom to say, I don't like what you're wearing. I don't like how you said this. I don't, you know, you don't have the right kind of shoes. You did. And so we've talked about that.
It is shocking what people will tell you bluntly.
Yeah. They feel the freedom to do that because you're in the public eye. If you were just an everyday person, they would never do that.
Well, you just think about the president of the United States. How many people have made comments about this one man? And whereas most people on earth don't get that type of attention, but the more power you get, the more influence you have, the more freedom culture seems to have in throwing out their opinion. And so you find that. Public eye is a very unique place to linger.
And one thing that actually, so there were pros, you know, the question of like, was this a positive or a negative? I mean, there were pros and cons. We were able to be a part of these incredible things that we saw God doing. And just to be a part of that was amazing. And we were able to we had to grow spiritually in a situation like that. We had to cling to the word. We had to stay rooted in truth, or we would have led people astray because we're influencing so many people. And so I think the gravity of that really sunk in early in our ministry, and we took that very seriously. And I think learning how to deal with criticism, that took me a lot longer to be immune to kind of that. The enemy really used criticism to kind of pull me down all the time. And so it took me quite a few years to gain victory over being constantly criticized. But one other positive I would say is that it constantly refined our delivery of truth. There were always those people in every audience, and they were typically and say it in a nice way, the religious ones. They were very into like doctrinal correctness, and usually they were pretty legalistic people. And I don't mind, you know, being a Berean and searching the scriptures and making sure that everything someone is saying.
Having high standards. There's nothing
wrong with it. Making sure everyone who is in a position of influence is biblical. But it definitely got taken a little too far at times, where people were scrutinizing every tiny little word you said. And if anything you said could possibly be interpreted a different way or possibly be misunderstood or misconstrued, they just rake you over the coals for it. And at first that was really hard for me. But what I've noticed in the 30 years that we've been doing this is we are very seasoned at making sure whatever we deliver that is going to influence others can't be misconstrued or twisted or taken the wrong way out of context. It has to be solid biblically, and we have to communicate it in a way that people can't misunderstand it or twist it around. And that came from, that's a hard skill to develop. I feel like we're both good at that, but I feel like that came through people just nitpicking everything we said and did in probably a religious spirit kind of way. So I feel like God leveraged that, even though that was not easy. I had people like criticize books I wrote and, you know, totally misunderstand my point and say, you're saying this, this, and this. I'm like, that is the opposite of what I'm saying. But okay, how can I say it better so that no one will ever misunderstand what I'm trying to communicate? And it's sharpened us.
Absolutely.
So lots of pros, lots of cons. Definitely not something I would ever recommend to someone unless you know God's called you there, because it's probably a lot more difficulty than fulfilling.
Well, let's maybe unpack some of the unique angles that the public eye can affect. You know, first of all, just statistically, if I were to say it, I would say the public eye brings about 95% trouble into a life and about 5% golden opportunity.
Well, you look at all the young kids that became famous Hollywood actors at really early ages, and most of them,
Yeah,
it
95%
completely
of them.
destroyed them. So it's really, it does set you up for a lot of things, like a lot of.
Most people don't survive it. It usually ruins someone. But that said, you can look through world history and you can see people that had an extra measure of influence because of something in their life, something that elevated them to a place where others were looking at them. And they have the opportunity, that 5% golden opportunity, if used well, can change the world for Jesus. And so we have reasoned through this many times. We've had many conversations on it. Because there were many times, I would say, I remember one season where I wanted to become a farmer. I don't know if you remember that.
Yeah.
I was done with being in the public.
I don't think you would make a good farmer at all. I don't think.
I had two granddads that did farming, but so I thought maybe
It's definitely
it would be
not
in
your
the
skill
blood.
set. It's not, I mean, even like, you're good at taking care of a lawn, but I don't think you could
I'm
grow
good at
something.
mowing it, is what you're saying.
Yeah.
It's good. It's a good thing but the reason I wanted to do that is because being in the public eye, I was focused on the 95% trouble that was coming into our life and how it was affecting you, your health. It was very weighty. As a husband, I'm thinking, I'm not much of a protector if I keep doing this, if I keep subjecting you to this. It was a difficult thing, but I don't want to give away too much as we walk through this. Let me give some different sub areas that we could talk about the impact of being in the public eye. We could talk about those that, because we're in the public eye, were influenced by it that may not have been influenced if we had not been in the public eye. Okay, so that would be like the public. And that's an interesting angle because that's the one that the devil never reminds you of. But what was the impact of being in the public eye on us as individuals? What was the impact of being in the public eye for us as a couple? Did it enhance our marriage? Was it a good thing? Would we encourage young couples to go out and get in the public eye? And, is that an enhancement? Does it increase romance? Or how about on us as a family? How has it impacted us raising kids?
Well, as far as marriage goes, there were two other couples that were in the public eye at the same time that spoke on the same kind of topic as we did, so godly relationships, and they have both since gotten divorced. So just to give you an idea, whoever's listening, that it's not easy on a marriage. And I feel like the reason we are standing strong today is because we went through some hard things and we allowed it to just drive us to scripture and say, okay, God has truth that we can apply to this difficulty that we're going through. If we had not gained some of those key spiritual truths that we still live out today through the really hard years of being in the public eye, who knows where we'd be now. That's, it's not because we are so amazing and we beat all the odds. It's because we went to the right source when we were going through something really hard, which was being in the public eye. But it's definitely not easy on a marriage.
Yeah, but for the grace of God, so go we. I think I wrote a book for you on our 20th anniversary. Do we sell that in our store? It's called Barracks 28. I think we might.
I don't know. Neither one of us really.
Yeah, it's not the time. We don't go to our own store and buy our books, but we released it, I think. I'm not positive. It's a very interesting study if you want to understand what we went through. And you can almost answer this question like, what was it like being in the public eye for Eric and Leslie in their first 20 years? And that book says it.
It's not really just being in the public eye. It's being in the public eye with spiritual influence, because that is what causes you to be a target for the enemy.
Yeah.
And so I feel like the public eye is one thing that's hard, but when you're also spiritually influencing others, you're going to have that extra measure of a relentless spiritual attack. So Barracks 28, that book, really enunciated all of the spiritual attack we had been through for that however many years. And yet it made us stronger. It drew us together. It drew us closer to Christ because of
it was our secret.
Because of approaching it with truth. And that's really what saved and strengthened our marriage through all of that.
So maybe it answers it, as individuals.
Well, we kind of already answered that in a way. Like that's hard to say. We became stronger through it.
Yeah.
It was hard. It was very difficult, but God leveraged every bit of the criticism and the difficulty and the just the awkwardness of being in the public eye to make us stronger through it.
And, it's matured us in every regard. Like I would say, for most of the things we do, the hazards and the challenges and the dangers we faced by standing in the public eye for Jesus Christ formed us. Mm-hmm. And so we are able to handle a lot of weight now, a lot of difficulties, a lot of challenges in a very different way than we used to. And, you can learn that. You don't have to be in the public eye to learn that. But I definitely think it was leveraged by the Spirit of grace to train us to be strong in that.
And I think by the time we had a family, we were really strong in certain principles. And they are principles that we learned in the early days to protect our marriage, and we applied those principles to our family. So I feel like our family has been really mostly protected from a lot of the garbage that they could have been exposed to, but partly because we weren't as much in the public eye or traveling around by the time we started a family, but also because we were very purposeful about being protective. And for example, I knew several people, I think we both knew several people who were in ministry in the public eye who did not put any boundaries, any healthy boundaries in their home or their marriage or their family. So ministry could encroach at any time, and people could call them day or night for counseling, show up at the door of their house. And we saw so many families and marriages fall apart of ministry families because they were not guarded with that. So even though it seemed to some people unspiritual, we had our private life that was protected. We did not just answer calls at all hours of the day or night. We did not say yes to every opportunity. And you can feel like really unspiritual about that until you realize, unless you protect the core of what you have in your marriage and family, your ministry is going to fall apart anyway.
Our philosophy, which is out of the 30 years, this is one of the most, I would say, salient, most central things that if someone was to stare at our life and say, okay, what could I learn from it? I would say, well, whether or not you want to learn it, this is a key one for us, is that if we're going to be effective in ministry, and if we're going to change this world for Jesus, we have to make sure we have a great relationship with God individually. We have to make sure that we have a great relationship together as a couple, and we have to make sure that our family gets the best of us, not the leftovers. Mm-hmm. And that philosophy leads to a certain protectedness where, no, I'm not available. No, I can't come speak. No, I can't do that. And we've had to learn to say no. And that's a whole nother life lesson for us, is that no is not a bad thing to say, because to say no means you're saying yes to the priorities in your life. You just have to know your priorities to be able to know how to wield a good no, because no doesn't need to be a bad thing. But for us, we've had to get good at saying no. We say no to almost 100%. I mean, it's close. Of all the speaking opportunities we have, we say no to a lot of different things so that we are present for the things that we know we're here on earth for right now. And that can be hard. Like you said, it can feel unspiritual at times, but it's been very critical for us to live strong spiritually and to go the distance in ministry, to be available when we're supposed to be available. And so that's been a unique life lesson. So
I think now we actually live on the ministry campus where we do our ministry with our family. But I think if we had tried to do that back in the beginning without understanding guardedness and protectedness and privacy for our family and all that stuff, it really could have destroyed our family. But because by the time we actually moved our family to this environment, those principles were so strongly established that it hasn't been a threat. In fact, if anything, it's really enhanced our family.
Our kids, as of right now, and we're going, we have 6, 20 down to 13 years of age, they still enjoy our ministry. They still love the truth. So our goal, we don't want to lose our kids. And a lot of ministry families lose their kid, sort of the concept of being a PK or an MK.
There's a constant balance. I mean, we're constantly weighing things like, okay, is this healthy for our family? Should we say no to this? Do we need more boundaries around that? And we're always looking for ways to make sure that guardedness is there. But it has been a healthy situation for our family, and it hasn't destroyed anyone's life. But I definitely see the grace of God, teaching us those things early on so that by the time we had our family, we could protect them.
Yeah. And it's interesting if we had our family in here and we asked them, would you prefer your parents to be out of the public eye or in the public eye? I don't know what they would say. That'd be a fascinating question.
There's pros and cons, just like we would say the same thing. And I also don't think we're as much in the public eye as we were back in the day. So it probably hasn't, it doesn't affect them on a daily basis, really. Every once in a while, they'll be like, oh yeah, there's all these people who know who my parents are, follow their ministry, and it occurs to them, but it's really not a daily thing. Whereas back when we were traveling all the time, it was a daily thing. So it's just a different season of life.
Yeah. I think that's good. Impact of us being in the public eye on the public. And I think that's where the 5% golden opportunity comes in. I mean, what's the point? Does God ever want someone in the public eye? And I've had my thoughts of if it's because when you see a celebrity mentality inside the church, you don't want to have anything to do with it. I mean, it's just disgusting. It's not the way the Church of Jesus Christ should function. And yet, okay, we have, for whatever reason, a weightier voice than the average person. And when we speak, people are listening and they want to hear. What do we do with that? Do we throw it away? Do we leave the country? Do we flee? Or are we supposed to leverage that? It's like God gave us a megaphone. What are we supposed to do with it? And I think that's been part of the art form that we've walked through, because, I mean, there were times when we were writing books and we're thinking, I hate the publishing industry. I don't know if I can't remember what we've even talked about in our episodes, but I don't know if we've talked. I think we probably talked about the publishing industry, the music industry, worse. And it's like, I don't want to be a part of any of this. This is grotesque to me. It's not, there's good people in it, but there's just so much junk. And it was so fleshly and so financially driven. It wasn't like the Spirit of God was moving like a cloud by day and the industry was like following. It was the exact opposite. I'd say if God was moving this way, they were typically moving the opposite way. They were following culture, not Christ. And so that's always a challenge for us. It's like, should we publish this book through this industry? Should we actually do this inside of this system? And I guess it's one of those challenges. I've heard the Kendrick brothers talk about, making movies and having them distributed through Sony. It's a similar type of thing. It's like, well, Sony may not be a healthy company, but, the Romans may not have been healthy, but their roads helped the gospel spread throughout the world. And so do you not walk on the Roman road? And I'd say it's a unique balance where you're trying to always maintain the integrity of character and soul and not sell out to the system. And yet, okay, Lord, you've given me a megaphone. How can I use that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say just being a part of watching God do a mighty work in people's lives and feeling like the only thing we're doing is just walking in obedience, and we're watching God do that work through the words we speak or through something we've written. That is an incredible thing to be a part of. And it reminds me every single time, this is not us. This is Christ through us. And that's the difference, I think, between someone in the public eye or someone who's an influencer just wanting their voice and their name and their message to be heard, or like someone who's willing to just say, even if it's one person, I want the Spirit of God to work through me. I want it to be His words, His truth flowing through my life. And that's what we, I think, have always gone after. And that's been an amazing blessing. Maybe in the next episode, we can share some of the specific stories of how we've seen God do that. But I would say, for whoever might be listening, even if you don't have a position in the public eye, but you maybe have a voice into someone's life, a neighbor, a friend, a coworker, a family member, even that, just taking that opportunity to say, okay, Lord, speak through me, work through me, to steward that opportunity of influence that you have and let God do the rest. And you don't have to be perfect. I know that in the beginning of our speaking ministry, I was so overanalyzing of how I said everything and how I came across. And I got to the point where I recognized if I am abiding in Christ, if I am hungry for His word, if I am going after His truth, if I am asking Him to speak through me, it's not dependent on my perfection. I'll do my best to be an excellent communicator, but I need to be dependent on Him and not myself. And so just keeping that in mind, that God can take he often does take the foolish things to shame the wise. He often uses small things that the world is like, why would you use that, to make the biggest impact? And so you don't have to be in the public eye, so to speak, to have that kind of influence on the souls around you. I remember reading a quote from Catherine Booth where she said, everybody has a soul or souls in their life that they have more influence over than anyone else does. Are we doing everything we can for their salvation, for their spiritual health? And that's a really challenging question to ask. And so when we have a lot of people who we have influence with, that's a weighty thing to steward before God. But it's also a weighty thing if you have one or two or three or four souls who are influenced by you, weighing that before God and saying, Lord, let this be your voice and your truth flowing through me.
That's good. I think that's a great way to finish, Les. Thanks for the conversation. That was fun.